The rain had started before dawn, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the yard outside the hut into thick, clinging mud. Catherine stood barefoot near the doorway, her toes numb from the cold, watching water drip from the sagging roof in uneven rhythms. 11 years old today, she thought distantly. The thought felt strange, unreal, like it belonged to someone else. Inside, Orlando paced. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the way his hands shook, by the sharp, restless movements that carried him from the table to the door and back again. His coat hung from his shoulders like it no longer belonged to him, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, the stitching coming loose. He smelled of sour ale and old sweat. Fear clung to him heavier than the rain. "Get your things," he said without looking at her. Catherine blinked. "My things?" she asked softly. Orlando stopped pacing. For a moment, something like hesitation crossed his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. He rubbed his jaw hard, as if trying to scrape the feeling away. "There's no time, just whatever you can carry." She glanced around the hut. There wasn't much. A blanket with more holes than warmth, a chipped cup, the small bundle of mended cloth she used for sleeping, and the silver locket hidden beneath her dress, warm against her skin. Her fingers brushed it instinctively. "Where are we going?" she asked. Orlando's mouth twisted. "You're going somewhere better." Catherine had learned long ago not to argue. Better was a word adults used when they didn't want to explain. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and stepped closer to him. Up close, she could see the red veins in his eyes, the way his gaze slid past her instead of meeting it. There was a knock at the door. Orlando flinched. He opened it to reveal two men standing in the rain, their boots clean, their cloaks heavy and dark. One of them carried a small leather pouch. It bulged slightly, the weight inside unmistakable. Catherine's stomach tightened. "She the girl?" one of the men asked. Orlando nodded too quickly. "Yes, 11, strong enough, quiet." The man's gaze slid over Catherine like she was an object laid out for inspection. "She'll do." The pouch changed hands. The sound it made, metal striking metal, was soft, almost polite, but it echoed in Catherine's chest like a crack splitting stone. Orlando's fingers closed around it, knuckles whitening as if afraid it might vanish. For a heartbeat, he looked at her, really looked. His mouth opened as if to speak, to explain, to apologize. Then the moment passed. "Go," he said, already turning away. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Catherine didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stood there, rain soaking her hair, watching the man who had raised her choose silver over blood. As they led her away, the mud sucking at her feet, Catherine pressed her hand to the hidden locket beneath her dress. It was the only thing he hadn't taken from her. And Orlando, counting his coins in the doorway, never once wondered why her touch left the silver warm. The line stretched longer than Catherine had expected. Men stood hunched against the rain, shoulders bowed beneath years of labor. Women stared ahead with hollow eyes, their faces streaked with mud and resignation. Children shuffled in silence, some crying softly, others already past tears. Iron chains linked wrists and ankles, clinking dully with each step, a sound that blended with the endless patter of rain. Catherine was placed near the middle. Cold seeped into her bones through the thin soles of her feet, the mud thick and sucking, clinging to her skin as if trying to claim her. Her dress, already worn, darkened as the rain soaked through it, plastering fabric to her small frame. Pale hair hung limp around her face, a curtain she did not bother to push away. She kept her hands folded in front of her, not in fear, in practice. The guards barked orders, striking those who moved too slowly, laughing when someone stumbled. Catherine did not stumble. She moved when pushed, stopped when told, her body light and obedient, as if she had already learned how to take up as little space as possible. Eyes lowered, breath steady, become nothing, become safe. She felt the weight of stairs. Buyers circled the line like carrion birds, boots clean, cloaks dry beneath wide umbrellas. They prodded arms, forced mouths open, discussed bodies as if discussing livestock. Strong back, weak knees, too old, too thin. One man paused in front of Catherine. "Why doesn't this one cry?" he asked. The guard shrugged. "Some don't." The man leaned closer, studying her face. There was mud on her cheek, rainwater running down her lashes. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Something unreadable passed through his eyes, interest, perhaps, or unease. "She's sick?" he asked. "No," the guard said, "just quiet." The man snorted and moved on. Catherine exhaled slowly. Around her, the line shifted as people were pulled away one by one. A woman screamed as her child was taken from her. A boy fought and was struck hard enough to collapse. The mud swallowed their cries, turning everything into one endless gray blur. Catherine did not reach for anyone. She knew better. When her turn came, a chain was fastened around her wrists. The iron was cold, but not as cold as the understanding settling deep in her chest. This was not temporary. This was not a mistake that could be undone. This was her life now, stretched out ahead of her like the road disappearing into the rain. Still, she did not break. Beneath the soaked fabric, beneath the grime and fear, the silver locket rested against her skin, warm, steady, unseen. Catherine bowed her head as the line began to move again, pale and silent among the broken. Unbroken in a way no one noticed. Catherine's fingers found the cold metal, almost by instinct, buried beneath the layers of tattered cloth that clung to her small frame. The silver locket had been in her family for as long as anyone could remember, a tiny circle engraved with a crest she did not yet understand, but somehow recognized as part of herself. She touched it now, hidden under the soaked folds of her dress, and felt a heartbeat that wasn't entirely her own. The locket had survived the rain, the mud, and her uncle's betrayal, as if it knew it had a purpose beyond being a keepsake. Every clasp, every scratch seemed to whisper a story, and Catherine listened in silence. Around her, the world was chaos. Buyers still prowled the line, guards barked orders, and the rain hammered the earth with relentless rhythm. But the small silver circle pressed close to her chest anchored her in a space no one could touch. A shadow fell across her, sharp and deliberate. Mara, the girl from the merchant's household, had come close, her gaze sharp, calculating. Catherine froze for the fraction of a heartbeat. Mara's eyes flicked over her rags, her mud-smeared hair, and then lingered on the faint gleam of metal beneath her dress. Catherine felt the weight of scrutiny press down like the rain, but she did not move, did not give anything away. "Something about you," Mara murmured, voice low, almost a hiss. "I can't place it." Catherine's grip on the locket tightened. She said nothing, not a word, letting the silence speak for her. Mara tilted her head, curiosity darkening her expression, and then stepped back. The moment passed, but Catherine knew it had not been forgotten. She had been noticed, and that could be dangerous. In the hours that followed, Catherine learned the value of stillness. She became a shadow among shadows, moving only when directed, speaking only when spoken to. The locket,
hidden beneath the rags, seemed to hum with its own quiet urgency, a reminder that she carried more than just her own fragile life. It was proof of blood that others would kill to erase, proof that she was not just another child in the line. At night, when the house settled into uneasy silence, Catherine traced the crest with her fingertips. She did not know what it meant, only that it demanded reverence. Her body curled into a corner of the cell, mud still crusted on her skin, teeth chattering, but her mind clung to the silver circle as a lifeline. It was more than jewelry. It was a declaration, though she did not yet know to whom it would speak. Rumors began to stir in whispers. Some of the older servants noticed the pale girl who never cried, the girl who carried herself as though she were part of a story no one else could see. Whispers always found ears, and ears often carried news to ears more dangerous still. Catherine felt the first flicker of fear, not for her daily survival, not for the cold or the chains, but for the secret she bore close to her heart. In the hours that followed, Catherine resolved to guard the locket with everything she had. Every wary glance, every hushed conversation, every unexpected touch from the buyers or servants was a test she would not fail. If the crest were ever revealed, it could undo everything. Lives would be lost, the kingdom could tremble, and she would no longer be just a girl in the mud. She would be something far more dangerous, far more valuable, far more hunted. So she pressed the silver circle to her chest, drew a slow, shivering breath, and let the rain wash the mud from her hair, if not from her soul. Beneath the rags, the crest remained, unseen but unbroken, a secret waiting for the day the world would have to notice her.
Catherine stepped into the buyer's household and felt the air change. The rain clung to her hair, but here the scent of polished wood and burning oil replaced the mud and sweat of the auction line. She moved slowly, her small frame swallowed by the hall's high ceilings and the merchant lord's quiet gaze that seemed to measure everything she did, every twitch, every blink. He said nothing, only watched as she passed, a collector examining a new acquisition for hidden worth. The house was a labyrinth of corridors and curtained windows, each room carefully curated with the display of power. Servants moved like shadows along the edges of light, their faces neutral, their hands quick to obey, and Catherine realized quickly that even in silence, authority demanded obedience. She carried her bundle of rags and the locket beneath them, feeling their weight as a tether between who she was and who they believed her to be. The buyer, tall, composed, dressed in deep shades of green and gold, spoke once, voice smooth as polished stone. "This one," he said, eyes lingering on Catherine, "may yet be useful." Useful. The word hung heavy, a promise and a threat, and Catherine understood instinctively that usefulness could be measured in cruelty just as easily as reward. Meals were served with careful precision, the clink of silver on porcelain echoing through the dining hall. Catherine kept her head low, her hands folded, tasting nothing and speaking less. Around her, the other children whispered and watched, calculating alliances in quiet desperation. One glance revealed the hierarchy of survival. The loudest, the cleverest, the cruelest would rise. The meek, like her, had to learn patience, invisibility, and the subtle art of being seen only when necessary. Mara was here too, sharper than ever, observing Catherine as if reading a map no one else could see. Catherine felt the heat of the girl's stare, the silent accusation in her glance.
Mara knew something, or at least suspected, and Catherine had no room for error. One slip, one careless gesture could betray the silver crest beneath her rags, could unravel the fragile shield she had built around herself. At night, Catherine wandered the hallways when the house fell into uneasy slumber. Oil lamps flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets she could not yet understand. She traced the walls with her fingertips, listening to the quiet creaks, the distant footsteps of those who maintained this delicate balance of wealth and fear. In these moments, she realized that power was not merely strength. It hid behind manners and walls, behind polite nods and cold eyes. It was a game played silently, and she had just entered the board. The locket pressed against her chest like a heartbeat, steady and defiant. It reminded her that while the household demanded compliance, she carried proof of something no one could see, a truth that would one day shake these walls. Catherine imagined the day when the silver crest would no longer be hidden, when her presence would matter not because she served, but because she commanded, because she remembered who she truly was. For now, she observed, she listened, she learned the unspoken rules of survival in a house built on quiet cruelty and polished deceit. Each glance, each whispered conversation, each measured step became a lesson. Catherine understood that in this household, visibility was dangerous, and invisibility was her only weapon. And so she moved among them, small, silent, and unbroken, a shadow with a secret, waiting for the day when the silver crest beneath her rags would no longer be her hidden lifeline, but her declaration of power.
Catherine had learned to move like water through the buyer's household, quiet, careful, never drawing attention, but even the most practiced shadow cannot escape every pair of eyes. Mara's gaze followed her from the moment she stepped into the grand hall, sharp as a knife, tracing every motion, every falter, every breath. The girl did not speak, did not scowl, did not plead. She simply existed, a pale presence among the fearful, and it unnerved Mara more than any act of defiance could. At meals, Mara sat across the table, elbows resting lightly on the polished wood, eyes never leaving Catherine. She watched the way Catherine folded her hands, the slight tension in her shoulders, the quiet precision with which she obeyed instructions without hesitation or fear. There was no hasty bow, no clumsy compliance, no tremor of panic, just a stillness that refused to be broken, and it irritated Mara like a stone underfoot. "You think you're clever," Mara whispered one evening when the other children had been dismissed, the air thick with candle smoke and the scent of roasted meat. Catherine only tilted her head slightly, careful not to show surprise, careful not to betray anything at all. Mara's lips curved in a faint, calculating smile. She had expected tears, fear, even the occasional cry. Instead, Catherine remained calm, her small frame unyielding, her pale eyes like winter ice, unflinching. Mara's curiosity turned to obsession. She began watching Catherine not just during meals, not just when orders were given, but during the quiet moments when no one else looked. In the servant corridors, where shadows clung and whispers traveled faster than footsteps, Mara observed Catherine folding cloths, cleaning floors, moving with a silent grace that seemed almost deliberate. There was a rhythm to her, a restraint that suggested more than mere survival. It suggested calculation, patience, and perhaps a hidden strength. Other children tried to provoke Catherine to see the cracks Mara was certain would appear. Push, insult, threaten. Nothing worked. Catherine's lips remained a line, her hands steady, her posture controlled.
Mara's eyes narrowed. This was not weakness. This was a presence that refused to be diminished, and it fascinated as much as it terrified. At night, Mara followed, pretending to retrieve a lost item or tidying an empty hall, watching Catherine drift along the shadowed corridors. The candlelight caught her hair in pale, ethereal streaks. Mara's mind spun with questions she did not dare voice aloud. Who is this girl who refuses to break? What secrets does she carry beneath her ragged clothes? And why does her stillness feel like a threat? Catherine, of course, felt none of Mara's scrutiny. Her senses were alive, alert to every creak, every whisper, every glance, but her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing invisibility, practicing patience, holding the silver locket close beneath her rags, reminding herself that the world she now navigated was a dangerous place, where even the smallest flicker of weakness could be weaponized. And Mara, relentless and cunning, could sense that something was different, though she could not yet name it. She had met many children who bent and broke beneath the weight of this house, yet Catherine remained unbroken, a quiet enigma wrapped in rags, carrying a secret Mara could not touch but could not ignore. The tension between them grew like a storm waiting to break. Mara's eyes burned with curiosity, suspicion, and a grudging respect she would never admit aloud. Catherine, unaware, moved through the house as always, small, silent, unbroken. But now a shadow followed her every step, and Mara's watching promised that the calm Catherine had cultivated might soon collide with the storm that lurked in other hearts.
Lord Alaric Vane moved through the musty corridors of the archive like a man tracing the ghosts of the past. Candlelight flickered across the spines of forbidden tomes, throwing shadows across his furrowed face. For a decade, he had followed whispers, rumors, and fragmented records of a child thought erased, a child whose bloodline could unravel everything the current regime had built. Each page he turned carried the weight of lives lost, of betrayals buried, and of a kingdom blind to its own corruption. He paused over a ledger that had been smuggled from a distant provincial court. The names were faded, the ink blotched from rain and neglect, yet among them one entry caught his breath. A pale-haired girl sold for 20 silver coins. The entry was brief, almost dismissive, but it resonated with the force of a bell tolling in a silent cathedral. Catherine, 11 years old, marked as property. The note did not know the truth it had recorded. The girl carried a crest, a bloodline believed extinct, a legacy hidden beneath rags and chains. Alaric traced the lines of the record with fingers that trembled, not from age, but from the gravity of the moment. For years he had hunted ghosts, following the faint scent of truth through courts and marketplaces, through whispers of servants and merchants alike. And now, finally, a thread had surfaced, a fragile, trembling thread leading him toward the line of children who had been sold, dispersed, forgotten. He imagined her small form, silent among the other captives, a ghost in the mud and rain. He saw the way she would move through the merchant's house, unseen yet unyielding, unaware of the eyes tracing her every step. The kingdom's fate rested not on armies or walls, but on her survival, on the endurance of a girl who did not yet know she was the key to restoring what had been stolen. Alaric's mind raced with possibilities and dangers. The men who had orchestrated the coup, who had erased her family, would not tolerate her discovery. Every lead he followed was a thread through a labyrinth of betrayal. He could not make a mistake. Not now, not when the faintest misstep could cost the girl her life and the kingdom its future.
He gathered maps and notes, marking routes to towns where children had been sold, tracking merchants who traded in lives as if they were nothing more than livestock. Each step brought him closer, yet every mile he imagined she had traveled added layers of uncertainty. Catherine had endured, she had survived, and survival alone made her dangerous, both to those who hunted her and those who sought to protect her. Late into the night, he allowed himself a moment of grim hope, lighting a single candle to illuminate the silver crest sketched in the margin of a ledger. The image was small, almost meaningless to anyone else, but to Alaric it was proof. Proof that the girl was alive, proof that the blood of the lost still ran strong. He whispered her name under his breath, a promise and a warning in the same breath. "Catherine," he murmured, eyes burning with determination. "I will find you, and a world will remember." The echoes of the lost whispered around him in the silence of the archive, faint voices of children sold, betrayed, forgotten. But among them, one voice would not be silenced. One girl, pale and unbroken, carried the weight of truth beneath her rags, and Alaric knew that the moment she learned who she was, everything would change. The kingdom, the merchants, the shadows that had ruled in silence. Until then, he would follow the thread, tracing the faint, dangerous path through a world that did not yet know the storm was coming.
It began with a drop of blood on stone. Catherine hadn't meant for it to happen. The cut was small, a careless scrape from a chipped basin as she hauled water through the inner corridor. She barely felt it. Pain had long ago learned to whisper in her body. But the blood fell anyway, bright and unmistakable against the gray floor. She bent quickly, pressing her thumb to the wound, heart racing for reasons she didn't yet understand. The stone reacted. At first, it was only a warmth beneath her bare feet, subtle enough that she thought it imagined. Then the faint grooves etched into the floor, old decorative lines she had scrubbed around 100 times, began to glow. Not bright, not obvious, just enough to notice if you were looking. Mara was looking. "What did you do?" the girl whispered, eyes fixed on the floor. Catherine shook her head, panic tightening her chest. "Nothing. I dropped the basin." The warmth spread, the lines pulsed once like a heartbeat, then faded back to dull stone as if they had never been there at all. Silence rushed in to replace it, heavy, dangerous. Mara backed away slowly, her face pale beneath its sharpness. "You need to hide that," she said, voice tight. "Whatever you are, you need to hide it." "I don't know what you mean," Catherine said, but her words sounded thin even to herself. She wrapped her hand in the hem of her rags and fled before more questions could come, before the walls themselves seemed ready to speak. That night, the household shifted. Whispers crept through corridors that had always carried only orders. Doors closed where they had once stood open. The buyer's gaze lingered too long when it fell on Catherine, sharp and measuring, no longer dismissive. Servants were questioned quietly, separately. Old ledgers were pulled from locked chests. The past, long buried, had begun to claw its way back to the surface. Catherine felt it like a storm pressing against her skin. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glow again, felt the warmth, the recognition, as if the stones had known her, as if they had been waiting. Before dawn, footsteps stopped outside her pallet.
Hands seized her arms, rough but careful, as though she were something fragile and dangerous all at once. She didn't scream. She had learned better than that. She let herself be pulled through halls she had only ever cleaned, into rooms she was never meant to enter. The buyer stood before the hearth, firelight cutting his face into sharp planes. "Where did you get it?" he asked calmly. Catherine swallowed. "Get what?" He nodded to her chest. The crest. Her fingers curled instinctively over the hidden locket. In that moment, she knew denial was useless. The secret had grown teeth. "It was my mother's," she said. The words surprised her with their steadiness. "That's all I know." The buyer's expression flickered, not with anger, but fear. "That crest belongs to a house that was erased, a bloodline executed for treason." "I've committed no crime," Catherine said. "No," he agreed, "but your blood has." The room seemed to shrink. Somewhere in the distance a bell rang, one then another, signals passed too quickly to be coincidence. Catherine understood then. This was bigger than her survival, bigger than servitude. She wasn't supposed to exist. Outside, the household stirred in panic, servants moving with frantic purpose, guards summoned where none had been needed before. A message had already been sent. She could feel it, like the tightening of a noose. For 11 years, Catherine had survived by being small, by being forgettable. Now the truth had found her, and it was screaming her name.
The night was heavy with mist, the kind that crawls into your bones and whispers of things better left unseen. Catherine moved quietly through the halls of the merchant house, her bare feet soundless against the cold stone floor. The silver crest beneath her ragged tunic felt like a burning weight against her chest, a reminder that she was more than invisible, more than a child sold for 20 coins. And tonight, that truth had made her a target. Mara's eyes glinted in the shadows, silent and sharp, but she was not alone. Behind the locked doors and whispered corridors, men and women whose loyalty had been bought and bartered waited. Their orders were simple: erase the girl who was not meant to exist, the heir, the lost bloodline. Their whispers carried through the walls, tasting of fear and greed alike. Catherine felt it in the small hairs along her neck, the tightening in her chest. Yet she did not panic. Survival had taught her stillness, taught her patience, taught her how to disappear while the world roared around her. A candle flickered against the carved door of the merchant's study, throwing shadows into the corners like specters. Catherine pressed herself against the wall, listening. A breath, a shuffle, a soft metallic click. The door cracked open. A figure stepped out, a dagger gleaming faintly under the candlelight, eyes searching for the unmistakable crest. Every instinct screamed to flee, to melt into the shadows, but her legs did not move. Something deeper than fear held her in place, a quiet defiance she did not yet understand. The first step was almost her undoing. A loose floorboard groaned, a sharp, echoing cry in the stillness. The figure froze, then advanced. Catherine felt the dagger against her ribs before she could think, the cold steel biting through fabric, grazing her skin. Pain lanced through her, a warning, and her hands went instinctively to the crest beneath her tunic. For the first time she saw it clearly, the silver locket glinting with a promise of power and inheritance she had never claimed. She twisted, slipping from the grasp that sought to silence her. Mara's voice hissed from the doorway, sharp and furious, but Catherine ignored it. Her heart beat a steady drum, her mind narrowing into the rhythm of survival. One step, two, and she had the study door in reach, throwing herself into the corridor. Men shouted, boots pounding, but she ducked into shadows, weaving through familiar passages.
Every turn carried her closer to escape, closer to a revelation she did not yet fully understand. She could not be erased. And in that moment, Catherine stopped being just a girl sold for 20 coins. She became the bloodline they had tried to bury. Every corner, every shadow, every stolen breath was proof that the lost could survive. Mara's voice rang after her, full of anger and disbelief, but Catherine did not stop. She ran through the cold halls with the weight of her legacy pressing against her chest, the silver crest glinting in the dark like a silent warning to all who would dare silence her. The night outside welcomed her with rain and wind, the storm matching the fury in her chest. Catherine did not look back. The air could be hunted, could be chased, could be threatened, but she would not be broken. Not tonight. Not ever. The kingdom's secret, the line they had erased, had survived, and Catherine, drenched, trembling, alive, knew that everything had changed.
The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, thin and hesitant, cutting through the mist that still clung to the streets like a stubborn ghost. Catherine stood on the steps of the merchant house, soaked and shivering, but unbroken. Her pale hair clung to her face, and the silver crest beneath her tunic caught the light, flashing like a beacon. For years it had been a secret, a hidden truth that marked her as something more than a girl sold for 20 coins. Now it was a declaration. She was no longer invisible. She had survived, and survival was no longer enough. The courtyard below had begun to stir. Servants whispered among themselves, eyes darting to the figure on the steps. Mara lingered at the doorway, her expression sharp and calculating, but Catherine no longer feared her. Fear had been a constant companion for too long, and now it was replaced by something heavier, something like purpose. The silver locket rested against her chest, warm from the night's rain, a pulse beneath her fingers that seemed almost alive. It was a heartbeat that had been buried, ignored, almost lost, but not quite. Lord Alaric Vane appeared at the edge of the courtyard, riding fast, his coat soaked with mud and sweat. He had followed the trail of rumors and whispered stories for a decade, a nobleman driven by a promise he could not break. When his eyes found Catherine, there was a moment of hesitation, a breath caught between disbelief and hope. She lifted her chin, and the morning light revealed her fully, not as a child, not as property, not as something to be hidden or sold, but as a living testament to a legacy that could not be erased. The silver crest gleamed like proof of everything they had tried to bury. It was not just a locket, it was a crown in waiting, a symbol of the bloodline that had survived betrayal and greed. Catherine felt it against her chest as more than metal, more than history. It was her claim, her right, the weight of her ancestors pressing her forward instead of crushing her. Around her, the courtyard fell silent, as if the world itself paused to acknowledge that the lost had returned. Mara stepped forward, her usual sharpness softened by awe and something like fear. She's not what we thought, she said, almost to herself. Catherine's eyes met hers, and in that gaze was a promise. No one could bargain away the truth again. Not her uncle, not the merchant, not the forces that had hunted her through shadow and rain. She had endured everything, and now she would define her own destiny. Alaric dismounted, approaching with cautious reverence. "The kingdom," he began, voice heavy with years of searching, "the kingdom has waited for you." Catherine's hand lifted instinctively to the crest, clutching it like a shield and a banner all at once. She was not a pawn in someone else's game. She was the heir, the lost child who had survived, and she would step forward on her own terms. The wind carried the first cries of those who would follow, who would recognize that a legacy could not be silenced, that blood and truth endure beyond the cruelty of men. Catherine breathed deeply, the chill of the morning biting her skin, but the fire in her chest burned brighter than any frost. She stepped down from the steps, every movement deliberate, every step reclaiming the years stolen from her. For the first time in her life, Catherine felt the weight of the world shift, and beneath it a strange and powerful clarity. She was no longer lost. She had remained, she had endured, and she would rise. If this story moved you, do me a favor, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of Catherine's journey. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And do you think Catherine should embrace her legacy or run from it? Your support keeps these stories alive.